Hello, it's Professor Asma Parveen, Department of Psychology, Aligarh Muslim University. Today I will be talking about types of variables in research. In research, as we all know, variables are elements that can change or vary. They are crucial in understanding relationships and patterns within data. Variables can be classified into different types based on their characteristics and the role they play in our study. The main types of variables in a research study includes independent variables, dependent variables, control variables, extraneous variables, and categorical variables. Each type serves a distinct purpose and contributes to the overall design and analysis of a research study. Before discussing the types of variables, first we have to understand about the SOR model, that is stimulus organismic response model. This SOR model provides a valuable framework for describing and analyzing the types of variables that influence human behavior. It helps researchers gain insights into the complex processes underlying behavior and facilitates the development of more effective interventions and strategies in various domains. SR model, according to psychologists, this is very important model and they use this model to study behavior and its causes by examining various variables. This SOR model consists of three components, that is stimulus variables, organismic variables and response variables. Stimulus variables are things in the environment that impact an organism such as light. Organismic variables refer to the physical and mental characteristics of the organisms being observed, like anxiety level or age. Lastly, the response variables are the behaviors or actions of the organism, such as pressing a lever or reacting to a stimulus. To better understand how the SOR model works, let's consider an example involving a rat. In an experiment, the rat is placed on a metal grid floor that delivers electric shocks. The time it takes for the rat to jump from the grid to a platform is measured. In this scenario, the electric shock serves as the stimulus variable with its intensity representing its value. The rat's physical state at the time of the shock, including its skin resistance, is an organismic variable. Finally, the time it takes for the rat to reach the platform after the shock is the response variable, also known as the latency. By utilizing this SOR model, psychologists can gain insight into how different variables interact and influence behavior. This model allows them to analyze the relationship between stimuli, organismic characteristics, and responses. It provides a framework for understanding the complex factors that contribute to an organism behavior. Through careful observation and measurement, psychologists can uncover patterns and draw conclusions about why individuals behave the way they do. Now we will discuss types of variables, and this figure shows different categories of variables from various viewpoints. As you can see, there are three viewpoints from the viewpoint of the causal relationship, study design, and unit of measurement, and there are different categories on the basis of these viewpoints. From the viewpoint of causal relationship, we will discuss that there are four categories of variables, that is independent variable, dependent variable, extraneous variable, and intervening variable. First, we will discuss this viewpoint of causal relationship because causal variables within the context of causal modeling refer to the factors or elements that are believed to directly influence or cause changes in other variables within a system. These variables play a crucial role in understanding cause and effect relationships and examining the dynamics of complex systems. Here are some types of causal variables, that is independent, dependent, extraneous, and intervening variable. First, we will discuss the first category of causal variable, that is independent variable. In all the researches and experiments, independent variables are the factors that researchers manipulate or control in order to observe their effects on other variables. These variables, also known as manipulated, experimental, or treatment variables, play a crucial role in causing changes in another variable. The researcher is responsible for controlling and manipulating the independent variable during the experiment. This allows them to study the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent one, which is the variable being measured or observed. By carefully manipulating the independent variable, researchers can gather valuable data and draw conclusions about cause and effect relationships. In scientific experiments, there are two types of variables, independent and dependent. The independent one is the factor that experimenter manipulates or selects in order to understand its relationship to a phenomena they are observing. Some experts have further categorized independent variables into two categories, that is type E and type S. The type E independent variables are directly manipulated by the experimenter through experimentation. This means that the experimenter can control and change these variables to see how they affect the outcome. For example, if an experimenter wants to study the effect of noise on task performance in an industry, they may manipulate the noise by dividing it into three categories: continuous noise, intermittent noise, and no noise. By directly manipulating the noise levels, the experimenter can determine how it impacts task performance. This type of manipulation falls under type E independent variables. On the other hand, type S independent variables are manipulated through the process of selection only. Instead of directly changing these variables, the experimenter selects different options or groups to compare. For instance, if the experimenter wants to investigate whether the rate of production is dependent on the age of the workers, age becomes the independent variable. The experimenter would select groups of workers from different age ranges, such as 16 to 55 years, and compare their rates of production. In this case, the experimenter is not directly changing the age of the workers, but rather selecting different age groups to observe and analyze. This type of manipulation based on selection falls under type S independent variables. Understanding the distinction between these two types of independent variable is crucial for experimenters when designing and conducting experiments. By knowing whether a variable can be directly manipulated or only selected, researchers can effectively determine the impact of different factors on observed phenomena. This knowledge allows them to design experiments that accurately test their hypothesis and provide valuable insights into the relationships between variables. So, whether it's manipulating noise levels or selecting different age groups, the type of independent variable used in an experiment plays a significant role in understanding cause and effect relationships. The second category of variable from the viewpoint of causal relationships is the dependent variable. In scientific experiments, dependent variables are those variables that changes in response to the independent variable, which is something that the experimenter is manipulating. It's like a measure of how the subject behaves or responds to the changes. This response can be measured in various ways, such as counting the number of times a behavior occurs, determining the duration of the behavior, calculating the time interval before it happens, or assessing the intensity of the behavior. These measurements help scientists understand the relationship between the independent and the dependent variables and draw conclusions from their experiments. In the study of variables, we can examine the connection between independent and dependent variables. These two types of variables have a relationship of dependence, meaning that one variable relies on the other. For example, if we find a correlation between the meaningfulness of learning material and how quickly we learn, it indicates that our learning speed is dependent on the meaningfulness of the material. The more meaningful the material, the faster we learn. In this scenario, the speed of learning is referred to as the dependent variable, while the meaningfulness is the independent variable. Dependent variables in psychology serve as the cornerstone for understanding the effects of experimental manipulations or interventions. These variables are the outcomes or behaviors that researchers measure to evaluate the impact of independent variables on specific psychological phenomena. Dependent variables are meticulously chosen to reflect the aspect of human behavior or cognition that the study aims to investigate. They can encompass a wide range of constructs from memory performance and mood states to attentional focus and social interaction. Another example could be an independent variable like noise, which affects the independent variable of changes in performance. When conducting an experiment, our goal is to uncover and validate the relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable. This process involves manipulating the independent variable and then observing the resulting changes in the dependent variable. By doing so, we can determine the impact of independent variable on the dependent variable and then establish a cause and effect relationship. Some examples to understand dependent variables include: in a study examining the effects of stress on memory, the dependent variable could be participants' performance on a memory recall task, such as recalling a list of words or images. In the research that is investigating the impact of exercise on mood, the dependent variable might be participants' self reported mood states measured using standardized mood scales before and after exercise. In another study investigating the effectiveness of relaxation techniques on reducing anxiety, the dependent variable might be participants' self reported anxiety levels measured using standardized anxiety scales before and after the relaxation intervention. Another example could be in a research examining the influence of violent video games on aggression. The dependent variable could be participants' level of aggressive behavior measured through observations or self reports after playing different types of video games. In another study that is exploring the effects of social media usage on social interaction, the dependent variable could be participants' engagement in face to face interactions with others measured through self reports or observational methods. In experimental studies like these, the dependent variable holds great importance as it is the outcome of or behavior that researchers aim to comprehend or modify by manipulating the independent variable. Dependent variables play a crucial role in experimental design as they assist researchers in understanding the connection between various factors and behaviors in the field of psychology. There are two types of variables in any experimental setting, and these are independent and dependent ones. Independent are the things that scientists change or control in an experiment to see how they affect the outcome, which is called the dependent variable. These independent variables are independent because they are not influenced by anything else in the experiment. Instead, the scientist purposely changes them. Independent variables can come in different forms depending on the study. They can be categories like different conditions in the experiment, or they can be continuous like levels of exposure. They can even be characteristics of the participants like personality traits. In psychology, independent variables are really important for understanding how different factors cause certain behaviors. By manipulating the independent variables, researchers can observe the effects they have on the dependent one. This allows them to draw conclusions about cause and effect relationships. For example, if a psychologist wants to understand how different parenting styles might impact a child's behavior, they might manipulate the independent variable of parenting style and measure the dependent variable of the child's behavior. Understanding independent variables is crucial in scientific research because it helps researchers identify and isolate specific factors that contribute to certain outcomes. By controlling these variables, scientists can determine the true cause of a particular phenomenon. This knowledge is valuable in fields like psychology, where understanding human behavior relies on identifying the factors that influence it. With this figure, we can compare independent and dependent variables. In this, stress leads to health deterioration. In this case, health is stress is the independent variable and health is dependent variable. Openness increases creativity. In this, openness is independent variable and creativity is dependent one. Extroversion leads to social acceptance or extroversion increases social acceptance. In this case, extroversion is the independent variable and social acceptance is the dependent one. Parent intelligence leads to child's intelligence. Parental intelligence is independent and child's intelligence is dependent variable because this is predicting the dependent variable. So in all the examples, independent variables are predicting the dependent variables. When we compare independent and dependent variables on various aspects, one of the aspect is representation. So when we graph our data, we usually put the independent variable on the x-axis and the dependent on the y-axis. This helps us visualize the relationship between the two variables. Another factor is control. In an experiment, we have control over the independent variable. We can manipulate it to see how it affects the dependent variable. However, we cannot directly control the dependent variable itself. Instead, we can only measure and observe how it changes in response to the independent manipulations. Another difference between independent and dependent is the ultimate goal of conducting experiments with independent and dependent variable is to understand the effect of independent on the dependent. We want to observe how changes in the independent variable influences the dependent variable, and then we gain a deep understanding of this cause and effect relationship. For example, in a study on the impact of sleep deprivation on cognitive functions, researchers examined how different levels of sleep deprivation affected our ability to think. They manipulated the independent variable, which was the amount of sleep deprivation, and tested it at various levels such as no sleep, 4 hours of sleep, and 8 hours of sleep. By altering the independent variable and observing its effects on cognitive function, the researchers gained insights into the relationship between sleep deprivation and thinking abilities. This study aimed to shed light on how lack of sleep can impact our cognitive performance. The researchers conducted several tests to measure cognitive function, including memory tests, attention tasks, and problem solving exercises. They found out that as the level of sleep deprivation increased, participants' cognitive abilities declined. Specifically, participants who had no sleep or only 4 hours of sleep performed significantly worse on these tests compared to those who had a full 8 hours of sleep. These findings suggest that sleep deprivation negatively affects our memory, attention, and problem solving skills. Furthermore, the study revealed that sleep deprivation can impair decision making abilities. Participants who were sleep deprived made riskier choices and showed decreased judgment compared to those who had sufficient sleep. This suggests that lack of sleep not only affects our cognitive processes but also influences our ability to make sound decisions. The researchers concluded that getting enough sleep is crucial for optimal cognitive functioning and decision making. The relationship between independent and dependent variables lies at the heart of experimental research in psychology. Independent variables are the factors that researchers manipulate or control, while dependent variables are the outcomes or behaviors that researchers measure. The purpose of experimental manipulation is to observe how changes in the independent variables affect the dependent variable. In scientific experiments, researchers manipulate independent variables to observe their impacts on the dependent variables. So, independent variables are the factors that researchers control or change, while dependent are the outcomes or behaviors that researchers measure. For example, if we are conducting a study on how music influences our mood, the independent variable would be the type of music we listen to, such as classical, rock, or jazz. The dependent variable, on the other hand, would be our emotional state after listening to the music, which can be assessed by asking individuals to rate their mood. By altering the type of music, that is independent variable, and examining its effect on our emotions, that is dependent variable, we can determine whether different manipulations evoke distinct feelings. Similarly, caffeine's impact on reaction time can be investigated through an experiment. In this example, the independent variable would be the presence or absence of caffeine. Some participants would consume a caffeinated beverage while others would have a decaffeinated one. The dependent variable in this case would be the speed at which individuals react to a cognitive task. By manipulating the consumption of coffee, that is independent variable, and measuring response time, that is dependent variable, we can ascertain whether caffeine affects cognitive performance. Understanding the relationship between independent and dependent variables is crucial in scientific research. By systematically varying independent variables and observing their effects on dependent variables, researchers can draw conclusions about cause and effect relationships, and this process allows them to investigate the impact of different factors on various outcomes. Whether it is studying the influence of music on mood or the effects of caffeine on cognitive abilities. Identifying and manipulating these variables enables researchers to uncover valuable insights. Moreover, the distinction between independent and dependent variables helps ensure the validity and reliability of experimental findings. By isolating and controlling independent variables, researchers can minimize confounding factors that may influence the results. This allows for more accurate interpretations of the relationship between the independent and the dependent variables. Additionally, clearly defining and measuring dependent variables ensures that the outcomes are objective and measurable, enhancing the credibility of the research. Third category of variables from the viewpoint of causal relationships is intervening variable. Intervening variables are factors that can affect the relationship between independent variable and a dependent variable. They can often appear when researchers are studying the relationship between two variables and don't realize that another variable is actually intervening in the relationship. For example, researchers may be interested in the relationship between education and yearly spending. They find that individuals with more education tend to spend more, but they fail to take note of the intervening variable, that is income. It turns out that individuals with higher levels of education tend to hold higher paying jobs, which means they naturally have more money to spend. Intervening variables can also be important when studying substance misuse and abuse. Risk factors such as perceived acceptability and safety of prescription drug misuse can increase the likelihood of substance misuse and abuse. Protective factors, on the other hand, can reduce the likelihood of engaging in problem behaviors. These factors include a high commitment to doing well in school and a strong parental bond. Identifying these intervening variables is important for understanding and addressing substance misuse and abuse in communities. It is also important to prioritize intervening variables based on their importance and changeability. Importance refers to how much a particular factor impacts the problem being studied. Changeability refers to how easy it is to modify the intervening variable. For example, if the problem is youth alcohol consumption, social access to alcohol may be considered high in importance, while retail access may be considered low. It is also important to consider the potential consequences of addressing one risk or a protecting factor over another. For example, restricting access to certain substances may cause an increase in consumption of others. In conclusion, we can say that intervening variables play a crucial role in understanding the relationship between independent and dependent variables. They can affect the outcomes of research studies and should be carefully considered and identified. In the context of substance misuse and abuse, intervening variables can help explain why certain individuals are more at risk and others are more protected. Prioritizing these variables based on importance and changeability is essential for effective prevention and intervention strategies. Another example of an intervening variable is hostility, because understanding human behavior requires an examination of intervening variables such as hostility. Although hostility cannot be directly observed or measured, it can be inferred from observable acts of aggression and hostility. By analyzing these behaviors, researchers can determine if hostility is present as an intervening variable. This knowledge is crucial in comprehending the intricate nature of human behavior. By studying intervening variables, researchers gain valuable insights into the complexities of human behavior. These variables serve as a bridge between observable actions and the underlying psychological processes that drive them. For example, hostility may manifest itself through aggressive behaviors, allowing researchers to infer its presence. This understanding contributes to a more holistic understanding of human behavior, taking into account both external actions and the internal motivations. Furthermore, intervening variables provide researchers with the framework for exploring the multifaceted nature of human behavior. Rather than isolating individual factors, researchers can examine how various variables interact and influence one another. This approach acknowledges the interconnectedness of different aspects of human behavior, highlighting the need for a comprehensive analysis. Fourth category of variables from the viewpoint of causal relationships is extraneous variable. When conducting experiments, it is important to consider extraneous variables. These are the variables that can affect the results of the experiment if they are not controlled. Extraneous variables can be characteristics of the participants like their intelligence level, gender, or age, or they can be features of the environment such as lighting or noise. The purpose of controlling extraneous variables is to ensure that the manipulation of the independent variable is what has an effect on the dependent variable. If extraneous variables are not controlled, they can provide alternative explanations for the effects observed in the experiment. There are different types of extraneous variables that researchers need to consider. Situational variables are factors related to the external environment that can influence behavior or decision making. These can include physical aspects of the environment, social aspects, or more abstract aspects like time pressure. It is important to control situational variables so that they are the same for all participants. This can be done through standardized procedures which ensure that conditions are the same for all participants. Another type of extraneous variable is participant variables, which refer to the ways in which each participant varies from the others and how this could affect the result. For example, if a participant is tired or has poor eyesight, this could affect their performance in the experiment. Participant variables can be controlled through random allocation to the conditions of the independent variable. Extraneous variables can have a significant impact on the outcome of a research study. They can provide alternative explanations for the results and threaten the internal validity of the study. For example, if the weather or time of a day is not controlled in a study of physical performance, it could affect the results. Researchers try to minimize the influence of extraneous variables by designing their studies carefully. This can involve controlling factors like weather, sleep, participant motivation, external noise, and time of day. Standardized procedures and random assignment are two methods that researchers use to control for extraneous variables. Standardized procedures involve making all aspects of the experiment identical, except for the independent variable. Random assignment means assigning participants to different conditions of the independent variable randomly. By controlling extraneous variables, researchers can ensure the validity and dependability of their findings. In scientific studies, it is important to acknowledge that there are external factors that can influence the relationship between the variables being studied. These factors, although not measured in the study, have the potential to either strengthen or weaken the observed relationship. So, it is crucial these additional or extraneous influences when interpreting the results of a study and drawing conclusions. By recognizing the presence of these extraneous factors, researchers can gain a more comprehensive understanding of the phenomena under investigation. This awareness allows for a more accurate analysis and interpretation of the data collected. Therefore, it is essential to take into account these real life situations and their potential impact on the variables being studied. There are different types of extraneous variables. There are basically three main types of extraneous variables: organismic, situational, and sequential variables. First category is organismic variables. These are the variables that are important factors to consider when we are conducting a study. These variables, such as age, sex, intelligence, and personality, can greatly impact the outcome of the research. By taking into account these individual characteristics, researchers can better understand how they influence the results. For example, someone's age or gender may affect their response to certain stimuli or their ability to comprehend information. Intelligence and personality traits can also play a role in how individuals perceive and interpret data. Therefore, it is crucial to acknowledge and analyze these organismic variables in order to obtain accurate and meaningful findings from the study. Next category is situational variable. These variables play a significant role in determining an individual's performance in an experiment. These variables encompass various environmental factors such as noise, temperature, humidity, and other elements related to the task at hand. The presence of these factors can create distractions or discomfort, ultimately influencing an individual's ability to concentrate and perform effectively. Consequently, the outcomes we measure may be impacted by these situational variables. Third category is sequential variable. These variables are an important consideration when conducting experiments in different situations. It is crucial to control for factors such as fatigue or improved performance due to practice, as these can impact the results and potentially lead to incorrect conclusions. For example, if someone becomes tired after completing one situation, their performance in subsequent situations may be negatively affected. This highlights the need for proper control measures to ensure accurate understanding of the connections being tested. Controlling extraneous variables is a crucial aspect of conducting research. It ensures that any observed changes in the subject of study can be attributed solely to the variable being tested. Scientists achieve this by identifying and considering various factors such as organismic, situational, and sequential that potentially interfere with their results. By doing so, they enhance the accuracy and reliability of their conclusions. Understanding the concept of extraneous variables is essential for conducting high quality research across diverse fields. In an experiment, the independent variable is the one that researcher deliberately changes or manipulates. It is the variable that is believed to have an effect on the dependent variable. The dependent variable, on the other hand, is the outcome or response that is measured or observed. It is the variable that researchers are interested in studying and understanding how it is influenced by the independent variable. Identifying and defining these variables is crucial for designing and conducting experiments effectively. To minimize bias and promote fairness in research, randomization is a valuable technique. It involves randomly assigning participants or subjects to different groups or conditions. By doing so, any systematic differences between the groups are eliminated, resulting in more reliable and generalizable findings. Randomization is particularly useful in experiments as it evenly distributes the effects of extraneous variables among the groups, minimizing their influence on the outcomes. A control group is a crucial component of experimental research because it serves as a baseline against which the effects of the independent variable can be compared. The control group does not receive the treatment or intervention being tested, allowing researchers to assess the true impact of the independent variable. By comparing the results of the control group with those of the experimental group, scientists can determine whether the observable changes are indeed caused by the independent variable or if they are due to some other factor. To minimize bias and enhance objectivity in research, blinding is employed. In single blind studies, either the participants or the researchers are unaware of their group assignments. In double blind studies, like this is a step further, that is, with both the participants and the researchers being unaware of group assignments. By implementing blinding techniques, conscious or unconscious biases are prevented from influencing the results. This promotes greater accuracy and reliability in the findings. Sample size is an important consideration in research. A larger sample size generally leads to more reliable and representative results. It reduces the impact of individual variations and increases the statistical power of the study. However, a larger sample size also requires more resources and time. Researchers must carefully balance these factors when determining the appropriate sample size for their study. To better understand the relationship between different factors, we will take an example. Try to understand the relationship between smoking and heart disease. Let's use this example. Imagine we are investigating how different factors can influence this connection. These factors include the number of cigarettes smoked per day, the amount of tobacco used, the duration of smoking, age, diet, and exercise habits. Each of these factors has the potential to impact the extent to which smoking contributes to heart disease. Some factors may strengthen the link, while others may weaken it. In our study, we are primarily focusing on the quantity of cigarettes smoked as the variable we are testing. The outcome we are measuring is the occurrence of heart disease. It is important to consider any other factors that could potentially affect this relationship, whether positively or negatively. These extraneous factors are important to take into account when analyzing the connection between smoking and heart disease. By considering all these relevant variables, we can gain a comprehensive understanding of the impact of smoking on heart health. This is all about the classification of variables on the basis of causal relationships. Thank you.